If you've seen any of my interviews before, usually I start at something like, I'm very fortunate to be joined by, let's welcome in. This time, I'll be honest with you, I'm somewhat starstruck. I'm talking to a trailblazer. I am talking to somebody who took basically a hammer and smashed down a wall and said, I'm here. Came in like the Kool-Aid man. We are being joined today by Laura Sanko, who is not only a phenomenal person, but also somebody who is the first female color commentator in the history of the UFC. Laura, it is an absolute honor to be chatting with you today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. That was a very generous intro, but the Kool-Aid Man reference, that might be my favorite thing ever. I'm running with that one. I'm stealing that one from you.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's so incredibly accurate. So we are here, of course, just days away from UFC 285. I'm still in Ottawa. By the time this airs, I will be in Las Vegas. I'm very excited for this event. But before we get to this fantastic card, I want to take a step back because there might be some people who might not be familiar with yourself, and I don't want to tell your story for you. Tell the good people about your journey to coming to the desk to commentating fights.
Gosh, well, I'm going to do my best to shorten it because we don't want to spend too much time on me, but I like to say I'm a super fan in many ways. I became a fan of Pride first back in like 2004 when I was in college. I'd be up late watching the Pride fights. That turned into a desire to train starting in 2006, which turned into being goaded into my first amateur fight around, maybe 2008 or something like that. Had 7 amateur fights, went 6-1 as an amateur, and then when Invicta came along, Invicta was the pinnacle of women's MMA. So I'd made my pro debut in Invicta as an atomweight. And then my life took a big pivot turn. I got pregnant actually while I was in camp for my second fight. And it really changed the priorities of my life, the direction of my life, because as we know, the UFC still doesn't have an atomweight division. So there wasn't really a field of dreams for me, right? They didn't build it, so I couldn't come. So I made the transition over to doing broadcast work for Invicta FC, had no training in that whatsoever, but just a love of the game. And so, yeah, it feels like a long time to me, but I think to the person watching who may not have been there from the beginning, it's been a quick rise from being a backstage reporter, which is a very traditional female role, to just a month ago making the big leap to becoming the first female color commentator since Kathy Long at UFC 1. 30 years. That's a long time. Yeah,
absolutely a long time. And one of the things too is that one of the things that I respect about you is that you have a tremendous passion for this. This was not just a matter of, okay, we're gonna, give this to her. This is something that you definitely earned in the sense of your knowledge of the sport is second to none. The fact that you're constantly involved in a lot of the things going on, whether it being the weigh-in show or, as you mentioned, some of the backstage interviewing, but every other podcast you're on. I'm just so fortunate that you had time today, because it's like you're very generous with your time in terms of, I think so many people want to talk to you because you're such an expert in this. So if ever the term well-deserved, ring true with a promotion, it's definitely here.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. It was definitely it was a lot of hard work. Nothing given in this one, and a lot of just me verbalizing and manifesting my desire to make this happen. And yeah, it's pretty crazy that I pulled it off, if I'm being honest. When I look back, I'll write a book about it someday. But yeah, I'm super excited to be in the position that I am now, and ready to put my head down and get to work and just do my best to represent these fighters and the sport that I love so much. That's the biggest thing. Is I think Joe Rogan does such an amazing job of capturing just the joy and the passion that you get as a fan, and I want to do that as well.
No, absolutely. And again, I know you, as you said, this isn't about you, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the great Billie Jean King sending out a tweet congratulating you. So it's interesting because you always think about, okay, what sort of audience does MMA have, and is it crossing over? Are people really in tune? And obviously it is. It's a global sport. But then you take an icon like Billie Jean King, game recognizes game, and then for her to shout you out, I thought that was fantastic as well. So again, Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. That was wild. I had to do a double take on that one. I had to double check that was really, really her account. And there was definitely a blue check mark there. And this was not some sort of like Billie Jean King appreciation account, but it was the queen herself. Very cool to see.
No, absolutely. It was her. So, okay. So UFC 285 coming up this Saturday, March the 4th, T-Mobile Arena. All of the talk, I don't know if you've heard about this, but all the talk is about this guy named John Jones, who's going to be returning to the Octagon, taking on former interim champ Cyril Gane. Of course, the big story with John Jones, vacated his light heavyweight title, took about 3 years off, and is now coming in a title fight. I want to get your thoughts on it, but I also want to ask you: do you find it odd that nobody's talking in regards to like, or not a lot of people seem to be talking about like Octagon rust? We've had fighters like Dominic Cruz and George St. Pierre take significant time off and come back, and that was the big story. But with John, it doesn't seem to be the case. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, or what your thoughts are on that. But
I think probably that's as a result of this wasn't injury based. So I think that's probably why it's not forefront in people's mind. It certainly should be a talking point, because anytime you spend that far or that long away from being inside of the Octagon, being an active fighter, it's worth talking about. I will say though that we've seen John on fairly lengthy times away, and when he does come back, he looks great. So I think that's part of it, as well as he does have a history of when there's been a larger break, we really haven't seen much of a difference in his game. I think really what's overshadowing that is just all of the differences that we might see with his new physique. That's what everybody's excited to talk about, and for good reason.
Absolutely. Now, in regards to Cyril Gane, of course, one of the things the two gentlemen have in common is they both have a 1 in the loss column. They're both very skilled fighters. From the Cyril Gane perspective, do you think that enough time has been made for him to have made adjustments with his wrestling to be able to compete with John Jones? Of course, the last time we saw Cyril Gane, the second last time we saw Cyril Gane, he was against Francis Ngannou, and his wrestling left him somewhat vulnerable. The wrestling of John Jones is pretty much second to none. So how do you see that playing out?
Well, I do think it's an interesting thing to bring up, and it's certainly going to be a big part of which way this fight ends up going. I really do think it's going to be a linchpin in terms of where this fight takes place, and then ultimately who ends up getting their hand raised. We have to keep in mind though that, when Cyril was preparing for Francis Ngannou, he didn't think he would be wrestling. No one thought that he was going to be wrestling, because that's just not something that Francis had ever done before. So with good reason, probably not a big part of his preparation. Now, that being said, so I guess my point there is it might have been the factor of surprise a little bit in terms of how successful Francis was there. That being said, I mean, to your point, John Jones is one of the most creative and agile and explosive wrestlers that we had ever seen at light heavyweight. Now, interestingly, that part of his game, if you go back and you look at that fight against Stephan Bonner very early in his career, I mean, I think he took him down, I don't know how many times, but every time he did it, it was a completely different style of takedown. I mean, it was a masterclass. And as his career progressed, he leaned on the wrestling a little bit less. I'm interested to know if there's any amount of concern about possibly getting stuck on bottom. I don't think that there will be, but that would be the only place where I would say John Jones as a heavyweight might not want to end up. Okay. That being said, of course, I think he's going to lean into the wrestling. I really do. That is the most obvious path to victory against a guy like Cyril Gane, who is so agile and so fast on the feet. And based on the bodies that John has brought in to work with, he's been picking up some big guys. So I do think that's a big part of the plan. Yeah.
Okay. No, I'm very interested to see how it unfolds. Do you think that because there was talk about John fighting Francis Ngannou, and then there was talk about John fighting Stipe Miocic, respectfully, Cyril Gane wasn't the first choice. Do you think that there might be a potential of John overlooking Cyril, thinking about that potential fight of Stipe in the future?
No, I don't think so. I think John's gonna recognize that Cyril has in many ways a more difficult skill set on the feet than either of those guys do. Yeah. Cyril is a unique individual in the terms of what he brings to the table striking wise. He is incredibly light-footed. he honestly, he does a lot of the same things that John does. So
Mhm.
he's very light-footed, he's agile, he moves well, he's got great footwork, and he's very, very creative with the elbows, with the knees, a lot of the things that we think of when we think of John Jones. So those are some factors that he would not have had to focus on as much against an Ngannou or a Stipe. But in terms of well-roundedness, I agree with you. So again, it all just comes down to who's going to be able to dictate where this fight takes place.
Yeah. It's going to be very exciting to watch. You also think to yourself, well, will there be a bit of an intimidation factor? We've heard, there have been different fighters in the past where their opponents are somewhat defeated mentally before they get in. Well, to see if that might be a factor with Cyril, but I guess that's one of those things we can't really predict. I suppose time will tell. I want to look at the co-main event. Valentina Shevchenko, who has been absolutely dominant in her division, defending her title against Alexa Grasso. What are you looking for in that fight?
Well, I think range is going to be critical for Alexa. She operates best at her boxing range. The thing that's going to be really tricky in this fight is that's also one of Valentina's best ranges. But the problem is Valentina has every range is a good range for Valentina. She's so perfectly well-rounded. And the only times that we've seen her, I don't even want to say struggle because it hasn't necessarily been a struggle, but the times where we've seen her be a bit human against Tyler Santos, even moments against Jennifer Maia, by and large, those moments have been on the ground when she's simply been controlled. Not that she was getting put in tons of really, really close submissions. It's just only two women were able to get her there and control her for a period of time. Alexa Grasso's wrestling has grown leaps and bounds over the years. I do think it is in a really good place. I'm not sure if it's to the point where Valentina Shevchenko is going to worry about it too much. And I will say this, I think that Valentina is coming into this fight with a little bit of a different attitude than she has her last few. I think although she sees Alexa as being just not on her level, which understandably why Valentina would feel that way about the entire division, I think there's a little bit of a chip on her shoulder based on lots of people verbalizing that she felt like she lost her last fight. And Valentina is a true competitor and she's professional about it. But I can assure you, when you see the confidence in that woman, she wants to be able to go out there and say, there's no doubt in anybody's mind that I am the best female fighter on the planet.
No, absolutely. And I feel that that her name doesn't come up enough in terms of conversations in terms of one of the great fighters right now. Because I think because she's so dominant, it's somewhat easy to overlook her. Although again, she's extremely consistent. I believe the longest reigning champion within the organization right now. So definitely a fight that I'm excited about. A lot will be focused on the two title fights, but what are some of the other fights on this card that have piqued your curiosity that you're really excited about?
If anybody's watched the weigh-in show, they know I'm going to say Shavkat Rakhmonov. I'm such a big homer for him. And it's not that I would ever root against, another fighter, but when I watch him, I get excited about his skill set. He's so complete. He's so exciting, undefeated at 16-0. And how rare is it to have a guy, not only is he 16-0, 8 knockouts, 8 submissions. So, one of the things I think, that's really critical to be a dominant fighter in MMA. You have to be a danger factor everywhere the fight goes. And it makes it incredibly difficult for opponents to prepare for you. And that is exactly what Shavkat Rakhmonov is. There's not a single box that he doesn't check. Now, the level of competition is rising. And I do think that Jeff Neal is a significant step up. Jeff's looking great, coming off a huge win over Vicente Luque. He's got heavy hands, a very athletic guy. So this will be the biggest challenge that he has faced in the UFC, but I mean, he's undefeated for a reason.
If you could draw it out, is there, and assuming he's victorious this weekend, is there a dream opponent that you would like to see him go up against? Like, is there a if you could match make, who would the next fight for him be?
I don't know if I would want it to be the next fight, but I have to see Shavkat versus Hamzat at some point. That has to happen. Yeah. It's almost like it's such a good fight, and because someone's star would diminish at least a little bit based on, after that fight, it's almost like I don't want it to happen, if that makes sense.
No, it does.
So I kind of want it to happen, maybe like let's have a couple more fights, but I have to see that at some point. Yeah. If they both continue on the trajectory that they are on now, unbelievable. What it was essentially be considered a super fight, even though they're in the same division. Once those two finally meet inside the octagon.
Yeah, I feel like Hamzat was somebody who came on the scene and we saw it quite frequently, and now it's like not as often anymore. So I don't think he has anything. You could correct me on this, but I don't think he has any fights booked right now. But it's definitely would be exciting to see him back in the octagon, hopefully soon.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah. Okay, so I'm absolutely stoked for UFC 285. It's going to be a fantastic card. But the world of the UFC, it is constantly churning. There are a lot of other great fights that are coming up in the not too distant future that I wanted to get your opinion on. We've got Israel Adesanya, who's going to be trying to reclaim his middleweight title against Alex Pereira. Do you think that this rematch is coming too soon? Do you think you should have taken another fight in between, or do you think that the rematch now makes sense?
I think the rematch makes sense.
Okay.
Considering how dominant Izzy was up until that point, I do think the rematch is warranted. It was obviously a very close fight up until the moment that it wasn't.
Mhm.
So I definitely think it's warranted here. It's the psychology of this matchup is what fascinates me. And I think it is incredibly ballsy,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, for Izzy to want to do this, to ask for this immediately, it's almost like he has to satiate this thing inside himself. He knows, or he feels that he knows that he is better than Alex, and he
Mhm.
has to see it manifested into reality. Um, it's a big ask to lose to someone more often than not and continue to want to fight them again and again and again, just to prove that that will not be the result every single time. He's going to have to go out there and do it in stylistic fashion, though, in order for
Mhm.
people to kind of shut up about, you know, well, now, not X many wins versus X many wins. He's going to have to go out there and really put a stamp on this. But I think he's capable of doing it. And when you look at the game planning of the camp that he trains under UG Berriman, those guys are second to none in terms of their level of preparation and the way that they're going to approach this fight.
No, I agree. I've always been extremely impressed with Adesanya's fight IQ and just how he makes adjustments for his opponents, and also the fact that he's not afraid of getting in against people like Yoel Romero and Paulo
Yeah.
Costa, and he welcomes those challenges. So there's a ton of respect there. And the question was asked mainly in terms of, sometimes I know when I've looked at situations where George St. Pierre lost to Matt Serra, he had a fight in between and then he came back. Sometimes the immediate rematch seems to be the way that we're going now, but I just wasn't sure if that was something that you thought should happen immediately or a bit of a pause.
Yeah, it used to be. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No,
yeah,
no, it's
you're
fine.
right. It used to be that they didn't do that quite so often. I think this is sort of a special case just because of the history that these two have and because of how dominant Izzy was as a champion when he was at the top. So I think that's why.
Yeah.
But to your point, that it wasn't always like that.
Yeah, definitely deserved. Another one that we're getting ready to run back, Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman. Of course, Kamaru Usman was extremely dominant as the welterweight champion, on pace to smash all sorts of records. And then the head kick heard around the world. In regards to that, of course, that rematch is coming up, I believe next month at the O2 Arena. How do
Mhm.
you feel about that? Do you think that that Leon's able to retain his title, or do you think we might see a swing back to Kamaru?
I think Kamaru's going to approach this fight with a level of focus that we haven't seen from him in quite some time.
Mhm.
He one of the longest reigning title holders in that division, was doing very well in the fight until one tiny mistake. And it just honestly goes to show you the razor's edge that this sport exists on. One moment,
Mhm.
one tiny mistake can change the course of your entire career. So I do think we're going to see a Kamaru Usman that is more motivated than ever. And that being said, there is something special about Leon Edwards having that, what I like to call GoPro footage. He's got that GoPro footage in his head now. He knows that
Mhm.
he is capable of, he has seen in reality that he is capable of knocking out Kamaru Usman. That's a very powerful thing to go into a fight with. And on the flip side, Kamaru Usman knows that he is capable of getting knocked out if he makes one tiny mistake. So again, I really enjoy thinking about the psychology of these two, but it's hard to, especially based on how the beginning of that fight went, it's hard to see there being a massively different way that it plays out. They both have very specific games, and it's just going to be a matter, I think, of who has a more perfect fight. You know, if one of them can have a perfect fight, that's who's going to win.
No, agreed. And it's one of those things. I want to be cautious in terms of asking you about these questions, because my expectation is that you're going to be commentating on a pay-per-view before long, and I'm very excited about that for you. And I know when you're commentating on it, probably not the best thing to like pick them. So I'm very excited for that in your future, by the way. Again, being respectful of your time, I want to take us into a little thing I like to call rapid fire. This is the Laura Sanko edition. I've got some fun questions here for you. I kind of feel like, since I'm talking to you, I should throw on a baseball hat, because you've always got baseball hats on when you're doing these podcasts.
I do it because I have a giant forehead.
Yeah.
And well, because I don't like doing my hair.
Yeah. I don't like doing my hair either, Laura Sanko. And people have said that I have a giant forehead. So us giant forehead people, you're
in a good club.
There we go. All right. So here is, okay. So the first rapid fire question, I got to tell you, this has absolutely nothing to do with fighting, but I ask this of all my guests. What is your favorite movie of all time? And if you can't think of one, I'll take a top three.
Last Mohicans.
Last Mohicans. Okay. Excellent. Yep. Love that.
I got married where they filmed it.
Really?
Yeah. On the whole ending scene, that really cool, where I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a really cool whole last section of the movie where they're running along the edges of these mountains. And that's actually a state park in North Carolina that you can go visit. It's beautiful.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. You have said in interviews, because like you, I've done homework, that the Karate Kid movie was somewhat inspirational for you growing up. With that in mind, was Daniel the bully?
No.
Okay. All right.
Who says Daniel was the bully?
There is a whole thing on YouTube in terms of, I should flip you the video, in terms of Daniel was actually the bully. It's an interesting psychology.
I will go to war. I will go to war with someone who says that Daniel was the bully. Absolutely not. Don't speak ill of Daniel LaRusso on my watch. Yeah,
they actually touched on it on Cobra Kai, so I'm glad that we've set the record straight here. Your knowledge is endless, and obviously I'm very fortunate for the time today. And again, as I've mentioned before, you do a lot of different appearances on podcasts. Where is the most random place that somebody has ever stopped you in your personal life to get your opinion on UFC?
Oh gosh, that's a good one. I was picking up a pizza once. I mean, I'm not really famous. Like I'm well known in a niche community. So I get noticed if it's a fight weekend in a fight weekend city. Like if we're in Salt Lake and there's a fight there, like I will get some people that come up and talk to me or want to take pictures. But when I'm at home, it usually doesn't happen because it's so out of context. But I was picking up a pizza one time, and this kid just wanted to know everything. He's like, who do you think's gonna win this? Who do you think's gonna win this? And I was like, bro, I don't, I just dice them up. I don't necessarily pick the winners, but it was kind of funny.
I'm just here for my pizza. All right.
Exactly. I just want to eat.
I love your I shouldn't say your appearances, but like your contribution to the weigh-in show. Now, for the people who don't know, the weigh-in show is a show that comes on during weigh-in day, right before a UFC event, usually a pay-per-view, where you're joined with several other people, one of which being Hall of Famer, former light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier. Yep. Question: Daniel Cormier, because you guys do a lot of games and competitions on that. Is he a sore loser, or is he just extremely competitive?
He's extremely competitive. He's a sore winner, is what he is. And he's a sore loser, actually. Maybe he's just sore in general. Yeah, he's just so competitive that he will do whatever it takes to win. Okay. And if he is bested, he will pout about it. But I will say, I'm the same way. So that's why he and I have so much fun. I cheat less, though. That I will say, I cheat a lot less on that show than he does. He's been caught many times cheating. But in terms of I'm not a good loser either. So I can't blame him too much on that one.
Okay, fair. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you grew up in Missouri?
Yeah, I did. I grew up in Kansas City. Yep.
Now, what sort of skills as a rancher were you able to help transition over into the career that you have now?
Oh, that's a good question. Not a lot between, I'm really trying to search for a good one. Ranching involves a lot of hard work. That's about the only thing. Other than that, I'm thinking of, bottle feeding calves doesn't really apply. Sticking cows on a chute and putting your arm up their ass doesn't really apply. Sorry for the
I was just even thinking of just like getting up really early.
Luckily, luckily that we don't have a dairy farm. If we had a dairy farm, I would give that to you. But luckily,
Okay.
our cows are not the kind that get milk. So I just wake up and I sip my coffee and I look at them and I wave at them, munching happily in the pasture behind me. But yeah, I'd probably have a better answer if I was working on a dairy farm.
Fair enough. Fair enough. One of the endless questions that is so fun to chat about is the GOAT list. Who would
Yeah.
be on your greatest of all time MMA list?
Okay. I got John Jones, number one. I've got, I'm just deciding between Anderson Silva and GSP. Anderson Silva, number two.
Okay.
GSP. I want to throw a woman in there, really. And this is the debate I think that's getting really interesting is it Valentina or is it Amanda? The jury's still out on both of their careers. So I'm going to put them there together. I'm going to cheat.
Absolutely. No rules in rapid fire. And I said list. I never said four. So that's,
oh, there we go. Exactly.
I think we always default to like to four. So that's totally cool.
I will say this too, though. Alex Volkanovski, well on his way to being in that conversation. Well on his way.
Yeah, absolutely. But curious side question, because you brought up his name in his fight against Islam, who did you have it scored for?
That's a great question, and you should not even ask me that because I'll start talking for an hour about this because I love to talk about the scoring criteria and why.
Oh no, an hour with Laura Sanko. That sounds terrible. Okay.
Yeah, Judge Sanko here.
Yeah.
So I did have it scored for Islam, and I'd have to have my notes in front of me in terms of which rounds I gave him, which ones I didn't. But I think it mostly came down to 3 and 4. Isn't that right? Or 2 and 4.
Yeah.
The round here, one of the biggest debates is, control time does not count for much in terms of the scoring criteria. And that is true. That phrase in and of itself is true. Control time in isolation means almost nothing in terms of scoring criteria. But what Islam was doing was not control time in isolation. That's what people, I think, are overlooking. When you advance to someone's back, that is effective grappling. And when you threaten with submissions, whether they're face cranks or rear naked chokes, that is effective grappling. So in those long moments where I understand there wasn't a ton of activity, and yeah, Alex was doing this, there's no damage. I'm sorry. There's no damage when you're punching like this.
Yeah.
There is effective grappling going on when someone has your back and is consistently working toward and almost threatening submissions. There wasn't a ton going on in that long exchange, but I give that exchange to Islam because of the things I just said.
Okay. Appreciate that. This is why I ask you. You're the expert.
I don't know that I'm the expert, but I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
Well, definitely one of the top experts in my book. If you weren't killing it right now with the UFC, what would you be doing?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I have so many interests and hobbies, and they are all over the place. I would probably be competitively horseback riding. I was doing that quite a bit, but as my travel schedule picked up and up and up, I had to sell my horse because it wasn't fair to him to keep him not keep him busy. But yeah, I love it's called eventing. It's like this it's like a three events combined into one over a period of 2 days. You can kind of think of it as like a horsey triathlon almost.
Okay.
So yeah, and it's so funny because it's an entirely different world. Like there is no overlap between UFC and that crowd and horseback riding in that crowd. No overlap whatsoever. Yeah. But that's probably what I would be doing.
That's okay. It's good to have multiple interests. As I get ready to embark on this solo expedition to Las Vegas, what is one thing I should do while I'm in Vegas?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh man, there's so much. The list is so long.
Okay, give me a few.
Have you been to a Cirque du Soleil type show ever anywhere?
I have. Okay, as a matter of fact, I was looking at the Michael Jackson one. I wasn't sure if that one might be worth checking out.
I haven't seen it, but I was going to say, if you haven't seen that type of show, you should. But if you have, then you should move on to the next thing. I mean, you just need to eat as much as possible is really what you need to do. And this sounds kind of silly, but even just walking through all of the famous casino and hotels, there's so much to see because all of them are themed and they're all, they go all out there in terms of making the casino itself entertaining enough to keep people in it and keep people playing and spending money. The shopping's amazing. The food is amazing. I do highly recommend that you make a little journey to the older downtown, the old Vegas.
Fremont Street.
Fremont Street. Thank you.
Okay.
There's a lot of fun stuff down there that people don't always get to when they're just thinking about the strip. So
Okay,
yeah.
fair. I want to end this the same way I started off with, and giving you an opportunity to talk about to aspiring journalists, what sort of recommendations and
Yeah.
advice you have for them. Just because, again, I think that you are such an inspiration, and I know a lot of people, rightfully so, look up to you. So, what's the
Yeah.
advice that you would give to aspiring and emerging journalists?
I think the biggest thing is that you have to love, and I mean, you have to love what you're doing, because it's probably going to take a while to get to the point where you envision yourself being. Not a lot of people realize that the first time I started covering MMA was 2010.
Mhm.
So while a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, this happened so fast for you, it really didn't. This has been a very, very long, twisty, windy journey. And in the beginning, I was doing lots of stuff for free because I loved it, and because I
Mhm.
just wanted to be close to the fights, and I just could not get enough of that atmosphere and being in the mix. I think that you have to make things happen for yourself. So in terms of like broadcast journalism, I always recommend that there's some local promotion within an hour of you. I
Mhm.
almost guarantee it, unless you live in the middle of the desert, there's some local promotion within an hour of you. And even if it's not televised, they probably have a Facebook page, and they would love to have you create content, interview fighters, do little breakdowns, whatever, for free. They're probably not going to pay you because those promotions have extremely limited budgets. Just start talking, just start getting stuff out there. Even if it's not on television, it's just on Facebook, or you just put stuff up on YouTube. Start somewhere and be consistent and be ready to do that for a long time. And the opportunities will they will come to you, and you will also need to go seek them out when you're ready to, I guess.
I love that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Laura, where can the good people find you? Obviously, they can find you on UFC broadcasts, the weigh-in show. I'm hoping you will be there this Friday.
I
But what are
will.
some
Yeah.
other places that people can find you?
My YouTube channel, One on One, where I do fight breakdowns. I do a lot of grappling demonstrations, which are kind of fun because I'm always doing some really weird weird submissions. And I'm probably most active on Instagram. People, if they want to message me, I can't get back to everybody, but I try really hard to be active on there and engage with people. Twitter's full of a lot of mean people, so I'm not always hanging out there, but I do
Mhm.
pop in here and there. But yeah, at Laura_Sanko for both Twitter and Instagram. So you'll find me somewhere.
Love that. We like to call those people haters, or as I like to call them, clouds. People who don't offer anything other than trying to bring people down. For what it's
Exactly.
worth, this person has been extremely grateful for your time. I think that you're a star. I should have worn sunglasses for this interview, quite frankly, because your future is so bright. I look forward
uh,
to the potential of meeting you in Las Vegas. I'm excited about this card. So thank you again so
Thank
much
you.
for the time. I really appreciate it. You take
Thanks,
care.
Keith. I appreciate it. Have a good one. We'll see you in Vegas.